Today's daf we're going to learn is Moed, Katan, Chet. We're actually going to get a relatively easy daf. So after those complicated ones, know that this is a little easier. Today's daf is sponsored by Shiur El Yassar in honor of Ellen Jaffe Kogan's birthday. Happy birthday to a lifelong Torah learner, a devoted Jewish woman, and a very special bubby with love from her children and grandchildren too. Today's daf is sponsored by Judy and David Gilbert in loving memory of Judy's sister, Hannah Cohn, Chana Sarah Bat Meir Tuvyan Ve'eshka, on her 20th year. Okay, we're going to get started now with our daf. I hope someone posted the sheet in the chat and the pictures. There's pictures, there's a sheet, and we will get started. So we have to review a little bit where we ended yesterday. We were talking about, are you really not considered a leper until the Kohen determines that you're a leper? And for that, we brought two psukim, two different verses. One of them we didn't really explain so well. We're going to have a big explanation today. And Machloket Abai and Rava, how exactly Rabbi Yehuda learns it from this pasuk. But we have Rabbi Yehuda and we have Rabbi. I'll just point out that some people say it's not Rabbi, it's Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda. Either which way, we have two opinions from two different verses. Where we get it from that you're only a leper when the Kohen determines you're a leper. So the first is from this word ubiyom, from the verse ubiyom heraot bo. And the day you appear in front of the Kohen, right? Why does it say, and on the day? To teach you, and again, we'll have to see how exactly we get it from this verse, that there are some days that you can show to the Kohen, and some days you're not supposed to show to the Kohen. And what are those days? For example, if you're within the 7 days, you're in the 7 days in which you're celebrating your wedding, right? Which is the wedding and the 7 days after. And if you're in holiday, you don't go show the Kohen. There it seems to imply there are specific days where you show the Kohen, and there are specific days you don't show the Kohen. We'll get back to this and how exactly they get it from the word ubiyom. We'll see soon. Then we have Rabbi, who says, and I want you to pay close attention to his language because there's going to be something that doesn't exactly jive here in the Gemara and the continuation with this language. But if we look at Rabbi, he says, Eino tzarich. Okay, I'm down near the bottom of Zion. I'm about 7 lines from the bottom or 8 lines. You don't, or maybe 6. You don't need the verse of Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, it's going to be very tricky because later the Gemara is going to say, why doesn't Rabbi hold like Rabbi Yehuda? And in the end, the Gemara is going to say, well, he needs both psukim. Okay, he needs this one because if you only have this one, you wouldn't be able to have that one. If you didn't have this one, you wouldn't have known this. Okay, one of those itzrich, which is very weird because Rabbi starts with saying, you don't need your verse. I have a different verse. Even though in the end, he's going to basically say you need both verses. So I'll raise that as a question. I don't really have a good answer, but it's a definite question here. Right? Sometimes we have to just live with the fact that there's questions and things don't always make perfect sense. So Rebbe says, why don't we need it? Because, and I didn't mention this specifically yesterday, but I want to clarify it now. Vitziva kohen upinuat habayit is specifically with a bayit minuga. Remember, there's 3 types of leprosy. We didn't really go into this yesterday, but there's leprosy of the body, leprosy of the clothing, and leprosy of the house. In the case of leprosy of the house, this pasuk appears and it says, before the kohen declares your house to be leprous, take everything out, and that way all your utensils won't become impure, and only the house itself, which is made of, we'll talk about this in a minute, made of stones, made of wood, specifically, that will become tameh. We'll get there soon. So now it says, right, therefore, what did we say? We said, what's the difference between the, right? And then they said basically, imam tinim lo ledavar reshut, right? If we wait to determine it in order to save you financially from having to destroy your earthenware pots and vessels and things like that, which can't ever be fixed. Well, all the more so, lidvar mitzvah, for a holiday. And that's where he gets it, that on the holiday, right? And then in general, it doesn't really matter whether it's a holiday or not a holiday. The idea is that you're not actually considered a leper. Your house is not leprous, or for all intents and purposes, your clothes are leprous until the Kohen comes and determines that they are. Now the Gemara says, right, we ended with this, my benayu, what's the difference between the two approaches? Abaye says it's just a matter of where they learn it from the pasuk. There's no real halachic ramifications. Rava says, well, dvar harishut would be a difference between them because according to Rebbe, it would even include any kind of reason you don't want to go to the Kohen, you cannot go to the Kohen. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it's only if you have a mitzvah and not just if you want to push it off for any random reason, which is a very big nafkamina, actually, right? It's a very big practical difference. Rabbi Yehuda, now we want to know, why doesn't each one learn from the others first? So Rabbi Yehuda, mehatam lo gamrinan dichidushu. This is a very interesting answer. He says this whole law of bayit menuga, the fact that your house can become leprous, which basically means it becomes impure, is all a big chidush. This is something that really shouldn't be. What does it mean, chidush? It means that if you took other laws, you wouldn't be able to derive it from other laws that we know about in the area. Why? Because the ha'etzim v'avanim, what did I say before? I specifically mentioned it earlier, so you'd have it in your head. What are we basically saying? Your house is tameh, your walls, right? Your beams in your house, right? The basic structural parts of the house, which are stones and wood. Now, stones and wood are generally, they're generally not susceptible to impurity. Okay, let's talk about this. Wood is, but only if it's a receptacle, not what we call pshutei kli eitz. We've talked about this before, but I know it's always hard to remember these things because it's not something we deal with on a regular basis. But if it's flat and it's a metal, it could become tameh. But if it's flat and it's made of wood, it's not susceptible to impurity. And here we're taking beams in your house that are going to become impure. Likewise, avanim, most houses were built with stones, and stones are never susceptible to impurity. They're just not. And therefore, we're taking things here that your house is made of that in normal tuma and tara would not be susceptible to impurity. And yet in a bayit menuga, we're making it tameh. That means that this is a chidush. What does it mean if it's a chidush? Well, it means we're taking something that normally under everything we know of wouldn't be impure, and we're making it impure. That means, right, they're not metamu, right? So I just want to finish the line. And here they are. That means once something is a chidush, it basically means we don't really understand it. If we can't understand it, then we can't attach it to something else. We can't apply it to a regular person who's a leper. So this is a specific halacha. Take everything out of the house as a unique halacha for a bayit menuga, but you can't necessarily learn there for a person who is a menuga because it's such a unique halacha that we wouldn't be able to learn anything from here to anything else. So therefore, they basically reject that and say, therefore, we can't learn from there. That's why Rabbi Yehuda has his own pasuk to learn it from Ubiyom Heraot Bo. Now, Rebbe Amav, Itzterich. This is where I told you. Rebbe is going to say you actually need both verses, even though he did say in the beginning, Eino tzarich, you don't need both. I don't need your verse. I'm going to bring you my verse, right? Because I have my verse, I don't need your verse. But in any case, the Gemara ends up saying that he needs both psukim. Why? If you just had the verse that said, and on the day, that was Rabbi Yehuda's proof, Havamina lidvar mitzvahim lidvar reshut lo. That's what we said before. It would only be for a mitzvah. If you're going to say certain days yes, certain days no. So you very simply say, okay, certain days no, which days no? Oh, it must be holidays when you have a mitzvah, when you have a good reason. But not if you just don't feel like today becoming a leper because you have things to do. You want to go shopping. You want to, right? It's like saying, I'll push off my corona test till I, get everything out of the way. And then I'll go check whether I really have corona or not. So that's why you need the other pasuk. Therefore, Katan v'chamana v'tziva kohen, which shows you even for the dvar harashut. Next, what about the reverse? Katan v'chamana v'tziva kohen. Why is that verse not enough? Hava amina hanein delav tuma degufe. Another difference between tuma of the house and tuma on your body, being a leper, is that tuma degufe might be different, right? The house is not in your body. You might assume that it's going to be more stringent when we're talking about your body. So if we say, take everything out of the house before I make you into a leper, right? Especially, by the way, if we think that this is a health-related issue, right? If it's your house, okay, I don't know if we think that your house is going to be contagious and get you sick, but if you have some disease, right, and it's in your body, and this might be another proof that maybe leprosy here is not really leprosy the way we think about it as a disease, but it's a more spiritual disease because of the conclusion, right? The havamina, the assumption here, the way of thinking in the beginning is maybe we would distinguish. So since it's not tuma degufe, that's why you could take all the kalim out of your house and you can push it off until the kohen comes. Aval tuma degufe, but if it's in your body and you have leprous marks on your body, you might have thought, maybe the kohen would have to see it immediately because, right, you can't push it off and you're really a leper, right away, even before the kohen determines. That's why you need both verses to teach you that you're not actually a leper until the kohen determines you're a leper. And in addition, on holidays and certain times, right, wedding week, we push it off. Amar Mar. Now we have to go back to this Rabbi Yehuda issue here. Yesh yom she'ata ro'eh bo v'yesh yom she'ata ro'eh bo. Amar Mar is basically saying, we're going back to something mentioned earlier. So-and-so said, I don't know why they don't just quote the line Rabbi Yehuda Omer, but either which way, it means the same thing. We're quoting this part that he said, which is from the words uvayom. We learn that there's days you see and there's days you don't show the Kohen. My mashma is always a question. It means, how did they get to that drasha from the pasuk? Okay, sometimes it's very obvious how they got from a drasha to, right, from some word to the drasha itself. This one, it's not so clear, and often it's not so clear, and they ask, how did they get there? So we're going to have a machloket Abaye v'Rava, and this you can see on the chart, if you have the sheet in front of you, that this affects how they learn out from this pasuk. It's what we call the ping pong kind of sugya, which is if he learns it from there and not from there, then it's going to affect how he darshans something else, and then how he darshans something else, because we're going to say the reason he doesn't learn like him is because he needs that for something else. He needs that for that halacha. Where does the other guy learn that halacha from? And we're going to ping pong back and forth. And even some we're going to, if you see there's a cross out because they suggest something and then they reject it and then they move it somewhere else. So you'll see that on the chart as well. Here goes. Amar Abaye, im ken l'chdov rachmana biyom my uvayom. It's simply the letter Vav. Ubiyom. It could have said Biyom Heraotbo, on the day that he sees it. But instead it says Uviyom, and on the day. That end is unnecessary. Therefore, it must be teaching us, and on the day, that there's two types of days. There's regular days, and then there's days that you don't show the Kohen. Rav Amal Kulaka Yeterehi. The whole pasuk, which it doesn't really mean pasuk, krabi usually means pasuk. Here it means word. The whole word ubiyom is unnecessary. Why? You could simply say, imken, sorry, I lost my place. Okay. Imken lichtav rachmana uveheraot. And when he sees, it doesn't have to say, and on the day he sees. All it has to say is, and when he sees. Why do you have to add the word day? My uviyom, shmamina, yesh yom she'ata ro'eh bo, yesh yom she'ata ro'eh bo. So Rav views the entire word uviyom as unnecessary, and Abaye only views the vav as unnecessary, which means end. Okay, right? Seems like not such a big deal, but obviously what you're going to have to do is, right, this has all sorts of ramifications. So now, right, my uviyom, I can't remember if I read this inside, but anyway, let's just go back to Rav. He says, otherwise, it should have said over here, my uviyom, because it says uviyom, shmamina yeshom she'ata ro'eh bo, yeshom she'ata ro'eh bo. There's two types of days. V'Abaye, what does Abaye do with biyom? He basically says only the vav is unnecessary. The biyom is necessary for obviously some other reason. What would it be? Well, the obvious. Whenever it says biyom, what does that teach you? During the day and not at night. So Abaye, ha'um Abaye le bayom v'lo b'layla. You can only show the kohen niga'im during the day. Right? This sounds familiar if you know laws of nida, that when it comes to a nida always has to look to see the color during daylight. Okay, if you want to send a question to a chacham also, or someone who knows. So it has to be during the day. Why? Because any kind of light, artificial light, affects the color, affects what it looks like. And this is important, just like nida blood, to see exactly what shade. This is also important to see what shade it is, to know if it's a problem, if it's not. So therefore, we basically say, the word ubiyom comes to teach you biyom v'lo b'layla. So now we obviously have a problem. If Rava thinks that biyom is all to teach you about, there's a yom you see, there's a day you don't see, which means you can't show the Kohen on Chol Moed or on the week of your wedding. Well, Rava biyom v'layla menale. Where is he going to learn this law of day and not night? So nafkale mi lecho mar'eh einei Kohen. There's another verse by Tzarat which says, for anything that Kohen's eyes see. Now, how can a Kohen see? Well, during daylight. Again, you have to remember, nowadays we do have good light, even though the light does change the way things look. But then especially, it was dark, you're using candlelight, it's very hard to see. So from the fact that it says, Kohen, that means b'yom v'lo b'layla, he obviously has to see it well. V'Abaye, it's almost like saying the naked eye, right? That he sees it with his eyes specifically and not from light or anything else. So now the Gemara says, Abaye, what is, right? We're going to ping pong. So what does he do? Why wouldn't he learn it from there? Well, he needs that verse to teach us something else. What does he need that verse to teach us? You need that verse to teach you that someone who's blind in one eye, if he's a Kohen, he can't check out a nega because it says, L'chol mar'eh einei, the eyes, plural. Einei is plural. The eyes of the Kohen, meaning he needs both eyes to be working in order to be check nigayim. So if you happen to be a Kohen who can only see in one eye, you can't check nigay tzarat. Okay, unfortunate for you, right? I don't know. Kind of would think that would be a good way to get out of doing it. Okay, now Rava, they say, wait a minute. If Rava uses the pasuk l'chol mar'eh einei Kohen to teach you daytime and not nighttime, well, now we have a problem. L'chol mar'eh einei Kohen, right? Rava nami b'bayilei lahachi. Doesn't Rava need to learn this halacha about a Kohen who's blind in one eye can't check a leper? Where would he learn it from if not from that pasuk? To which, cross that out, he doesn't learn b'yom v'lo b'layla. Inachinami, you're right. Rava and Abaye both learn the same thing from that pasuk. So that pasuk becomes no longer part of our ping pong. They both actually agree on that verse. So what are we left with? Well, we still don't know. So we're still stuck with, if Rava has the word ubiyom and he says the whole word is unnecessary and it teaches us about our sugya, where do we learn biyom v'lo b'layla, day and not night? So for that, he takes a different pasuk. Nafkalemi kinega nir'ali babayit. When you go forth to the Kohen and you tell the Kohen that you have a problem with your house, the Torah tells you that ubasher lo abayit, the person who has nega tzarad in his house, he gid le Kohen lemol, he tells the Kohen to say, right? I didn't actually look this up to see if, there's certain places in the Torah where it gives you a specific text you're supposed to say. I don't know if this is really actually what you're obligated to say exactly these words, but either which way, the Torah gives you, if the person goes and he says the following thing, Kenega nir'a li babayit. A nega like this was seen to me in my house. So from there, now he could have just said Kenega nir'a babayit, right? It seems I have a nega in my house, right? A nega was seen in my house, but he says was seen to me. What does that mean? Li v'lo la'oli, to me, to my naked eye, and not with the sunlight. Okay, an artificial light. So therefore, the word li comes to teach you li v'lo la'oli. It was seen to me directly with sunlight and not with any sort of unnatural light. From there, you would have to assume that it would have to be during the day. So Rava learns it from there. What's the obvious last question we have to deal with? Why didn't Abaye learn it from there and then say the whole word biyom was unnecessary? Abaye imehatam havamina, and we're going to do something a little bit similar to what we did before. Hanimile detuma delab degufe. That might be only true when it's not on your body. Okay, remember we discussed the tzarat of your house is different than tzarat that's on your body. Maybe because that verse was only said about tuma of the goof. What about tuma of the house? What about if it's on your body? Maybe on your body you would be able to see it with light, artificial light. Kama, right? Even at night. Kamashmalan. That's why I had to learn it from a different verse. Why would we distinguish? I thought of one possibility. When it comes to your house, let's say it depends where it is in your house, but it's not always easy to bring the light to the spot, right? Let's say it's high up in the ceiling and you can't get the light there. Whereas your body, you can always move close to the light and you'll be able to see it well, right? It's movable as opposed to your house, which isn't movable. Maybe that's a possibility. Anyway, that's why Abaye learns it from the other verse. And with that, we finished our ping pong discussion. Moving on now, and I highly recommend reading Flashback this week, which is already up on the site. It's all about the history of burial. Okay, very interesting, different, okay, what Shuli Mishkan discusses there is all different types of burials, methods of burial. She talks about how many of these burial methods, by the way, were only for the wealthy, not for the poor, and all different kinds of methods that change throughout time. And obviously, we're getting a small glimpse into things that happened in the Tannaitic time period. And then also, we're going to get a bunch of different things, and not only burial methods we're going to see here, but also we're going to see different things that they would do about eulogizing. We'll see all sorts of interesting things that are different, very different from the way we do them today. So, Od Amar Rabbi Meir, the Mishnah continues now and says, and furthermore, Rabbi Meir says, Melaket Adam Atzmot Aviv Imo, you can collect the bones of your father and mother. Okay, what would people do? They would first bury them until all the flesh decomposed. Then they would take the bones and they would kind of put it in a smaller area. And that was called Likut Atzamot, gathering of the bones. And then they would bury them, according to the Rashi here on the page, it says, then they would bury it in their family burial plot. Okay, often people had a burial cave for the family and they would take all the bones and put it there. So Rabbi Meir says something very interesting, which you're going to see the Gemara has a really hard time with. The day that you do likut atzamot is simcha hilo. It's a happy day for the person who's doing this, okay? Why would this be a happy day? All sorts of reasons are suggested. Like I said, we'll see in the Gemara that the Gemara changes this. But, right, yes, thank you, Gita, for pointing that out. When they say Ne'asaf alav utav, I mean, it's all over the Tanakh, right? That he was buried with his fathers, all the kings, they get buried with their fathers, etc. That's what we're talking about here. So now, what is this simcha associated with likut atzamot? So I'm not going to give you all the reasons that are potentially given, but I'll give you some. So, to a certain extent, there's closure, right? You're finished with the process. You feel like your parents have now gone to their ancestral plot. You feel like there's this kind of closure of things happening, right? I see what you're saying, Adina. It's very relevant, right? When you talk about the Golden family and other families who are waiting to actually bury, right? It's a little bit different because here you do have the bones. You do have the body before. It's a bit of it different, but there is this amount of closure. Okay, again, it's hard for us to understand likut atzamot because we don't generally do this, right? Once in a while, people are taken from one place to another. Okay, and I don't know if you know about this, but you actually become avel that day, and we're going to see that in the Gemara. So that is going to contradict exactly what Rabbi Meir says. Okay, you actually, or no, hey, if you bring, let's say, bones of, right, I know people who've done this, you bring them from, let's say, abroad to Israel, and you bury them at a later date, right? Which there's all sorts of, questions about that, but in general, people do that, and then you sit shiva that day. Okay, during the day, not at night, and we're going to see that in the Gemara. So Rabbi Meir says this is simcha. So again, it could be because your ancestral plot. It could be because there's closure, right? It could be all sorts of possible reasons, but I'm not going to go into them too much because again, the Gemara is going to reject this. These are all just why we think Rabbi Meir would hold this in the end. Now, it could be Rabbi Meir really did hold this. It's probably likely, and the Gemara just can't believe that he does, and they change it. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Evel Hulo. Rabbi Yossi says, no, it's a very sad day. You don't do this on a regel, on a holiday. What are you, crazy, right? This is a very sad day. It opens up all the wounds again, right? It's not easy, right? If you think about nowadays, so we don't really have the likut atzamot generally, but what do you have? Like, let's say they did this. I don't know the time period, but I'm assuming they did it, let's say a year later, right? If you go to the year, people go visit the grave, usually it brings up everything again. It's a very difficult day, right? Now, on the other hand, though, it is a sort of closure, and it does bring you to the next stage where, again, it's not like it went away, but it is sometimes a little bit easier after that. So maybe you could see both directions. But definitely, I think we relate much more to the Evel Hu Lo answer. Lo yo'orer adam al meito velo yaspidenu kodem laregel 30 yom. This is a very interesting halacha. Lo yo'orer adam al meito. We'll see this in the Gemara, what exactly it is. But it's getting other people to mourn with you, okay? So you can't encourage other people to mourn with you, and you shouldn't eulogize a person 30 days before a holiday. Okay? Now, we've seen before in Megillah, in Ta'anit, all these days that you're not allowed to eulogize people. And it was a day that some miracle happened to the Jewish people, if you talk about Megillah Ta'anit. It was holidays, things like that. But we don't have, right, Rosh Chodesh, but we don't have 30 days before the holiday. Where did this come from? I mean, you're cutting off huge days of the calendar that people can actually eulogize. And we haven't really seen this before. So what are we talking about? Okay. So there's a big debate about what exactly this lo yaspidenu 30 yom, and we'll see in the Gemara why this is. So I'm going to put it aside right now, and we'll get to it very shortly. Uraminhu. So first, the Gemara is going to bring contradiction to Rabbi Meir. Now, I want to, again, use this as a way to learn about methodology of Gemara. Normally we have questions where we'll take a braita or a Mishnah, and we'll question an Amora, and we'll say, hey, you're a later person. You can't say something that goes against a Tana unless what, right? There's all different methodologies of how to deal with it. One of the most famous ones is, well, if you have another Tana who holds that way, the way you do, you could say, well, that's one Tanaic opinion, and I hold by a different Tana. Okay, and that's a very simple way to answer it. What we're doing here is a little bit different, but it's similar. We're taking a Tanaitic source, and we're questioning not an Amora, but a Tana. We're going to question Rabbi Meir from what appears in a Braita, which is what I talked about, likut atzamot being a day where you have to sit shiva, which seems to totally contradict. Now, what's the obvious answer that Rabbi Meir could say? That Braita is Rabbi Yossi. And we already know there's a machloket Tanaim. It's a little bit different than when we're in Amora and he says something, and then we say, by the way, someone says this, and then we say, oh, well, we can look and find there's a machloket. We started off where there's a machloket, and it would have been the easiest thing to just say, that's Rabbi Yossi, and I don't agree with that. So you have to wonder why they didn't do that. Either it was just obvious and everybody agrees about this, or it was just obvious to them that there's no way that Rabbi Meir could actually think that it's a happy day. And therefore, they're just trying to basically use this as an opportunity to get to their conclusion, which is we're going to reinterpret Rabbi Meir. Okay. Now, whether that's when they reinterpret Rabbi Meir, whether that's really what he said or not really what he said, we don't know. Okay. But clearly the Gemara has an agenda to basically change what Rabbi Meir said because it doesn't make sense to them. And they're using a tool that they have, which they do have a potential other answer, but they don't bring that because that's not the answer they want to get to. So Urimin, if you gather your bones of your father or mother, you have to sit Shiva that day, but not at night. Okay, you basically, that day becomes a day of Shiva for you. The Amar of Chisda, it's not 100% clear why they need to add this, because really it sounds like it's enough already to raise a question against Rabbi Meir from this. Rabbi Chisda says, Afilu tzurim lo bistino. This is a little hard to understand because we don't really know the reality, but even if you have the bones gathered up in a sheet, okay, or in some sort of cloth, and you haven't yet buried them, okay, some people say what it means here is, even if you haven't buried them, the day of Likut Atzamot before they're actually buried is going to be an issue, okay? You're already going to be in Avel, not only after you bury them, but even before, okay? Which shows that Likut Atzamot is a sad day, right? The whole day is a sad day. Some people say that what it means is if you, let's say they weren't in the ground, but you had them in a cloth, and then every time you open them, it's likely Likut Atzamot all over again, okay? Anytime they're exposed and you're kind of dealing with them, that would be Likut Atzamot when they're closed. Not, again, it's a little hard to understand what he's saying and what the purpose of his statement is, but in any case, we get the idea that this is a day of Avelut, and therefore, we're going to say, how could he say that this is a happy day? So, Amar Abaye, Ema mipnei shesimchat haregel alav. He doesn't really mean that it's a happy day, but what he means is if you do it on the holiday, we've been talking, Avelut itself, right? We don't do on the holiday because we don't want you to be sad at the same time that you're happy. But this kind of day of Likut Atzamot is not the same thing. Likut Atzamot is not as sad as the day that your parent would die, let's say, but it's because, and therefore it is a sad day and you're supposed to be in Avel, but since you have the simcha of the regel on you, you're already in a happy frame of mind, that will mean that you won't end up deep in Avelut from doing this action. Okay, so it's not exactly that it's actually happy for you to do it. It's because you're happy on the regel. That means that you're not going to be so sad about doing this and you can actually do it on the regel. That's his approach. Now we're going to move on in the Mishnah. Lo ya'ar'er al meto. So my lo ya'ar'er al meto. This is a good example of the Babylonians don't really know from this because they weren't doing it. So who's the one who's going to tell us what it is? Rav, because Rav grew up in Israel, moved to Babylonia, and he quotes them what they do in Israel. He says, right, because remember, the Mishnah was put together in Israel. So it was obviously with what was going on there. So he says, Kad had saftana b'ma'arava amre, like when the saftanim, those are the eulogizers, we'll see in a minute, the people would pay eulogizers, they would hire them. It was a job to eulogize people. Comes up all over the Gemara, this job of a eulogizer. And they were good at getting people to cry and be sad, right? Sometimes you go to a funeral, if there's good speakers, it gets you more emotional about it. So b'ma'arava is Israel, they would say, Yivkun ime kol merire liba. Okay, they should cry with me, all those who are sad, right? So basically it was a way of saying, let's say someone, God forbid, died that was a relative of mine. I would have a saftan who would go around to my friends and say, go cry with her if you're feeling brokenhearted about this. Okay, so that's what this Ar'er al Hamet is. So this is something you can't do 30 days before. So now they ask, why 30 days before? Can't you do this? So we're going to have a machloket, Rav and Shmuel, a very interesting machloket, and then we'll get to halacha l'maaseh because we don't even do this, and the question is why. Amar Rav Kahana, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav. Okay, it was passed down in the name of Rav. Maaseh, and they tell a story. Okay, we're going to learn it from a story, very interesting story. Maaseh ba'adam echad shekines ma'od la'alot l'regel. Guy collected money. I want to go on aliyah l'regel. I'm very excited. He collects money over time. He's got his whole pile of money all ready to go. What happens? Basaftan va'amaro petach beito. The eulogizer comes outside his door and starts eulogizing about somebody that was maybe a friend of theirs. We don't know, a relative, a distant relative. Unitaltan ishto unitanatan lo. she was so moved by the eulogy, she took out, this is like giving a tip, right? She was so moved by the eulogy, she went outside, took all the money that her husband had collected for Aliyah L'Regel and gives it all to the eulogizer. So obviously, and obviously then he couldn't go on Aliyah L'Regel, which was obviously more important than mourning this person. This is when the rabbis realized something's not right here. We're going to get into trouble down the road. This might happen again. To prevent it from happening again, no can do. Very interesting story. Shmuel says, when you get sad about something, it stays with you for 30 days. Okay, now we're not talking about, and this is why also this seems to be a little bit different than what we do. What we're talking about, look at that story with the eulogizer. It wasn't at a funeral. It was that he would go around in the town and start talking about people to get people upset about people. So we don't want to get you upset. Now, someone who it's their own relative, their close relative, that's different. It's often therapeutic for them to hear the hespedim. It makes them feel better. But for some outsider, and that's why some people say this is talking about people who aren't the family, right? And then it wouldn't really be at the funeral that we're talking about, which is why maybe this isn't relevant. It's more talking about a eulogizer going around and eulogizing people on the street. We don't want to get people upset and sad about things that go on in their community because, 30 days before the holiday. Okay, my benayu. So what's the difference between these two? If you do it for free, then obviously Rav wouldn't be worried about it. He's only worried about you using up your money. Okay, now but Shmuel, obviously it's not about the money. It's about the people being sad. We don't want people to be sad on the holiday. Okay. What do we do with this halacha l'maaseh? Who do we hold like? There's a big machloket. Do we hold like Shmuel? Do we hold like Rav? Okay, Tosfot says we paskin like Rav because we always hold like Rav and Shmuel. There's always rules. You hold like Shmuel when it comes to mamonot issues, money, monetary, financial issues, and Rav with Isurim. And this is part of the Easter Peheter world because it's what you could do before the holiday. So we hold like Rav. Most other people we hold like Shmuel. One thing that's really missing here from this sugya, which might give us a bit of a clue, is it doesn't say, not that it gives us a clue, but it teaches us something else. Another big nafkamina would be what? If it has to do with spending your money on Aliyah L'Regel instead of eulogizing, why didn't it say that one of the practical ramifications is if there's a temple and there's not a temple? If there's no temple, then who cares if they take your money and they spend it on the eulogizer? But obviously we all know that even though there's no temple, we all have a lot of expenses before holidays, whether it's replacing parts of your sukkah, getting the arba minim, whether it's, buying cheesecakes for Shavuot, maybe Shavuot less. Pesach, okay, I don't have to start with all the expenses of Pesach. So they incur a lot of expenses and people do save up money to have money for the holidays. So it's actually, that issue is really not any different. Okay, what about, so now if we hold like Rav, then, right, nowadays we don't really have eulogizers that we pay money to. So it's very easy to say this isn't really relevant. But if you hold like Shmuel, which most of the people hold, most of the commentaries other than Tosfot and a few others hold like Shmuel, it really sounds like it would still be relevant, right? We don't want people to be sad. So some people say that this whole halacha is really only referring to someone who died before 30 days before. What we're talking about is a eulogizer who comes to town later and starts reminding us about someone who died earlier. Then it makes perfect sense that it's not appropriate leading up to the holiday to remind people about someone who died in the community and start getting them to be sad about it. So that's one way to basically somewhat neutralize the halacha, because again, it's not something that people generally do nowadays. And again, once you say that it's not for the person themselves, well, then it's irrelevant for the funeral. And then you also basically neutralize this whole halacha. So that's basically the direction you have to go in to understand how this works in with what we do today. New Mishnah. Ein choflin kuchin ukvarot b'moed. You can't dig crypts, burial crypts. Okay, this is again, like if you've been to Beit Sha'arim and you've seen these burial caves, if you haven't recommended, I've mentioned it before. And kfarot, okay, we're going to have to see in the Gemara what's the difference between kuchin and kfarot, okay, burial plots. Avam mechanchim et hakuchin b'moed. So you can't dig them from the start, but you can mechanchim. We don't yet know what that is. Again, the Gemara is going to explain. Vosim nivrechet b'moed. You can dig a ditch. There will be a pool, create a pool of water on the holiday. Okay, what does a pool have anything to do with this? right? And if I'll continue, you'll see it really has nothing to do with this. You're allowed to not only dig a pool, like a ditch, to have a pool of water collect there, but you can also build a coffin for the dead body. If the dead body's in your courtyard and you want to build a coffin for it, you can. Rabbi Yehuda says you can't build this coffin unless you already have the boards, but you can't start creating boards to make right? If it's just kind of hammering a few boards together to make a coffin, that you can do, but you can't start cutting the boards from a tree. Okay, what is this pool doing in the middle of this Mishnah? Seems a little bit weird. What's the pool for? So, and why are you allowed to dig it is a whole other question, right? Generally, you can't dig. So first of all, some people say, why is this here? Because it's a similar action to digging a grave. So they're saying digging a grave isn't allowed, but digging these pools, for whatever reason, we'll see later what these pools are for, would be permitted. Some people say that we're actually talking about a pool. Okay, I see you're asking, Chaver Kadisha, I don't know if you're asking about this, but a pool for rinsing the dead body, a pool for washing. Oh, and most people think, by the way, the pool is for laundry, which, by the way, you say you're not really allowed to do laundry on Chol Moed, but there are some types of laundry that are permitted. And the pool is really a laundry pool. That's the first explanation. I forgot to mention that. It's a laundry pool. And, then again, it has nothing to do with this. It's just digging. And digging for this is not allowed, but digging for the pool is allowed. But if you say it's laundry, you could connect it with the dead by saying either it's to launder the person, not really launder, but wash the dead body, or possibly launder the tachrichim to put on the dead body, or the clothes of the dead body, any of the dead person. It could be connected. It makes more sense to think it has to do with that. Okay, now the Gemara asks, "My kuchin u'may kvarot." What's the difference? Amar Rabbi Yehuda, kuchin bechafira ukvarot bebinyan. One is underground, one is above ground. Okay, I think that they mean, although I think Shuli explained a little differently in her article, but my understanding was you have this burial cave, and sometimes the bodies were buried into the ground in the cave, and sometimes they were above ground. Like at Beit Shavim, I remember there's all these places that are above ground. And then according to the commentary I saw, they would cover it with, you would basically put them in a niche, and then you would cover it with some sort of, teeth, they say covering, like some sort of covering over it, or obviously buried in the ground and put dirt on top of it. Okay, so those are the two different ones. Either which one is a problem, to either dig above ground or dig below ground. Tanya Nami Hachi. If you didn't believe, Rav Yehuda's definition, we're going to bring up Raita that says exactly that, and that more proves because it's from the time of the Tanaim. Eluhin kuchim be'eluhin kvarot, kuchim b'chapira ukvarot bebinyan. This is a very simple Gemara because we're just basically translating what the Gemara what the Mishnah means. Right? Again, you have the Gemara. Later, they don't understand the wording of the Mishnah, and they ask, and then they explain. So, and it's not that they didn't know. In the end, they do know, but a question was asked, and then an explanation comes because not everybody understood the wording. It means you can fix it up, that if it was long, you can make it shorter. Okay, let's say the body was small, so you can shorten it by filling it in with dirt. Or, b'manitatan in a braita, they say, ma'arich bo u'marchiv bo, dafka the opposite. Okay, either which one, it's fixing it up. You can widen it or lengthen it if you need more length or more width. So the Gemara says this is a classic sugya that we kind of wouldn't say laugh at, but it doesn't really help us very much, okay? Because they have a word, they don't understand the Mishnah. They describe it by a term that they know from the time of the Gemara, which doesn't really help us because we don't know what that means. My nivrechet, Amar Rav Yehuda zo bakia. Okay, nivrechet is a bakia. Okay, again, it's going to mean a pool. Tanya, hanivrechet, by the way, nivrechet has the root brecha in it, right? Brecha in Hebrew is pool. So my nivrechet v'zo bakia v'hatanya. How could you say nivrechet is bakia? It says in a braita hanivrechet v'habakia, as if these are two separate things. Okay, I'm not going to discuss the context there. The point is, there's a nivrechet, there's a bakia. What we mean is there's a pool and then a smaller pool, like a gia and the son of a gia. Okay, a gia is a pool, or something like that, but it means there's a bigger pool, and then because the bigger pool wasn't big enough in case too much water came, instead of digging it deeper, it was easier to just dig another hole right next to it, and then whatever would go from one would overflow into the other. Right? It's like, why did they say it in this term? Bar Giha, the son of, right? It's like a father-son kind of thing. So now they said you can build an aron in your courtyard if you have a dead body there, But we saw there's a machloket, and we saw who said it. I just want to get the wording right. Rabbi Yehuda said you can't do it unless you already had beams. So now the Gemara is just going to tell us very simply, Tanina lahad tanu Rabbanan. What appears in our Mishnah appears also explicitly in the Braita. The only difference is the one who's named in our Mishnah is not named here, and the one who is not named in our Mishnah is named here. So, right, each one has a Tanakama, and it's the opposite, right? Tanakama meaning an unnamed Tana, we don't know who said it. And here, by the way, in the Braita, we get all sorts of other things. You can do all sorts of things you need for a mate. Gozizim lo saro, you can cut their hair. Mechabsin lo ksuto, you can launder the clothes of the dead body. Vosin lo alom minisarim hamenusarim me'erev yom tov. Here's the Tanakama. He holds like Rabbi Yehuda, that you can make an aron if they were already prepared. The boards, the beams were prepared from Erev Yom Tov. From Shimon Gamliel Omer, you can even bring wood and cut it on the rega. Mishnah. So now, again, the Tanakama appeared in the name of Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. New Mishnah. This might be more familiar to you than most of the halachot we saw today. You're not allowed to get married on Chol Moed. Okay, that's why you might think, oh, great time, everyone's on vacation. No weddings on Chol Moed. We're going to see 4 reasons. You might know one of them, which is fun because we're going to see something that maybe you already heard of, and you'll see it in today's Gemara. But I think what's more interesting about seeing something that you know, and oh, wow, it appears in the Gemara, but even the more so, it appears with 3 other potential opinions, and it's not the only opinion, even though it's the one that people always quote. So you can't get married on Chol Moed, lo betulot v'lo almanot. Okay, not if you're marrying a virgin or non-virgin or widows. Okay, which really means unmarried women or a married woman. Okay, we're going to assume erusin. By the way, you're asking. I'm sorry, I'm glad you asked because I forgot. Erusin is always allowed. Why? Because we're worried that someone else will get betrothed to her. So that we always allow because it's like davar ha'aved. What if someone else comes and snatches the woman away? So yes, you're allowed to. Then why does it have to mention lo almanot? Well, it's the kind of structure of a Mishnah. Not only this, which is more obvious, but and then once this, if you can't marry Betula, obviously you can't marry an almanah, but we're going to add it anyway. Okay, because in almanah, it's less exciting to marry a woman who's married already, according to the Gemara. Okay, we're not, all sorts of practices and customs and ideas about marriage that don't always fit with the way we see them today. Below miyavmin, okay, you don't do yibum, which is levirate marriage. If the brother died without children, then the wife marries the brother. It's also simcha. Why can't you do these things? Because these are happy events. Okay, even though already she was supposed to do yibum with him, and they were, even though you're betrothed, right? It doesn't matter. This is a happy event. Well, why, if it's happy, should that matter? We're going to get to that in the Gemara, right? Until now, we've been saying it's sad. You can't do sad things. Now we're saying you can't do happy things. Okay, that's a little bit strange. You can remarry. If you divorced your wife and want to remarry her, you're allowed to do that because that's not marrying someone from the first time. That's always much more exciting. She can do all sorts of things with jewelry. We're going to run through these cases because we're going to see them more in the Gemara after. Rabbi Yehuda Omer lo tasud, she shouldn't put lime on her body. It was things they did like when people do facials and things like that for their skin, either to get the hair removed or for making the skin softer, because while she's wearing it, it's kind of gross. So it's sa'al. A regular person can sew the way they do as long as they're not an expert at it. If you're an expert at sewing, you can sew in a different kind of manner. We'll get to exactly what that is on Daf Yud. The beds were these boards they would string, they would put ropes, okay, in shti and erev, warp and woof, right, the 2 different directions, but they would kind of weave them into the bed. So according to Tanakama, you can. Rabbi Yossi Omer mimatchim, you can only stretch them. You can't also this, right, according to Tanakama, you could do both the laying out the ropes and the stretching. According to Rabbi Yossi, you can only do the stretching. You can't do the other. There's going to be a big debate about what this is on Daf Yud. So here comes the end of our daf. So what if it's happiness? I don't get it. What's the problem? My have. What's the difference? It's a happy day. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, very famous line. So either Rav Yehuda said the name of Shmuel, and also actually not either. He said it, and here comes the either. Either Rabbi Elazar said it in the name of Amar Rabbi Yoshaya, in the name of Rabbi Yoshaya, but Amar, some people say Amar Rabbi Elazar, Amar Rabbi Chanina. We're getting a big intro to this line. Okay, or he said it in the name of Rabbi Chanina. Okay, you might have heard this before. You can't mix happy occasions. Okay, you can't put them all together. And Why is this? So the Tosfot, if you look down at Tosfot, number one, he says it's a Gzerat HaKatuv. It's learned out from the Pasuk, which we're going to see later. They learn from a Pasuk in Shlomo. In the Yerushalmi, they learn it from somewhere else, which is very fascinating. They learn it, Tosfot says, Malei Shavua Zo, we learn it from Lavan. When Lavan tricked Yaakov and he married Leah, a week later, even though many people think it's 7 years later, no, he married her a week later, had to work another 7 years for her, but he married her immediately, but not immediately. He had to wait 7 days because a wedding is 7 days long. And then Tosfot adds, though, it seems to me a little, it's like Einosim mitzvot chavilot, which we learned in Pesachim, those who learn Pesachim. You can't bundle up mitzvot and do 2 mitzvot all in one. Why? Because each one doesn't get its, right? It's like trying to do too many things. You're not doing anything well. You kind of miss out on everything almost. So he says, right, you're not going to be libo panoi lemitzvah achat, right? You want to be fully in one place. So you want one simcha and not to try to split your simcha in half. The next one is a little similar, but a little bit different. It's not that you're going to split. It's that you're going to ignore the simcha of the regal because you're so happy you're getting married that you're going to totally ignore the simcha of the regal. We don't want you to do that. So as opposed to saying you're not really doing either which one well, you're actually going to choose one over the other, and we know which one you're going to choose. This is an aside. What he said in the name of Rabbi Rafuna, actually, it's really Rav said it before him, because we see here the Amarav Daniel Bar Katina. He said Amarav in the name of Rav. So you have to be happy, rejoice on your Chag. You're rejoicing because of the Chag, not because you got married or some other happy occasion. Next, that was 2. Now we get to 3. Okay, we all know this. Right? And you talk to someone after a simcha and you say, how you're doing? And they're all like, thank God it's over, right? Because it's a lot of work. We all know it's a lot of work. We don't, what we've been talking about all along, can't do extra work on the holiday. We don't want you to have to deal with all this extra work. And I remember someone told me once they put on their fridge when they were marrying off one of their children, remember it's a simcha, right? Don't get bogged down by all the good advice. Okay, last one for today. Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha Amar Mipnei Bitul Pirya Rivya. This is a very interesting one. They're concerned on the holiday, you entertain lots of people and you make lots of food. And on a wedding, you make lots of food and you entertain people. So people will say, I'm going to push it off to the Chag when I can do everything all in one. It's a better time to have a wedding because then I can save money. You know, remember, there were no caterers in those days. And, you know, even if there are caterers, you could save money. And if you were doing it all yourself, you could save a lot of effort. And then what's the problem? This is fascinating. We're worried that you're pushing off the couple from getting married. We don't want them to push off having children. Okay, that for that issue, they're going to basically say, don't get married at Chol Moed, so that people don't push it off a few months, half a year or something like that for that reason. Okay, we'll stop here and tomorrow we'll start with some questions on these approaches. Have a great day, everyone.